Good morning. Welcome to the committee's first meeting on Bill C-81, an act to ensure a barrier-free Canada. The objective of today's meeting is to start the committee's study on the bill, and we will begin this process today as we are joined by the Minister of Public Service and Procurement and Accessibility and her officials. I'd like to take a moment and just bear with me. I've got a bit of a preamble here to remind both those participating in the proceedings as well as those observing the proceedings of the committee in person and on video that the committee adopted a motion on September 18th which included instructions for the clerk to explore options to allow for the full participation of all witnesses and members of the public on this study. As a result, the committee has made arrangements to make all meetings in relation to the study of Bill C-81 as accessible as possible in a variety of ways. This includes providing sign language interpretation and near real-time closed captioning in the room. Please note that both American Sign Language and Quebec Sign Language are being offered to those in our audience. For those who would like to watch the American Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my left. For those who would like to watch the Quebec Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my right. In addition, please note that the first two rows of the benches have been reserved for those who wish to avail themselves of these interpretation services. Screens displaying the near real-time closed captioning have also been set up with the English to my left again and the French text to my right. The sign language interpreters in the room are also being video recorded for the eventual broadcast of the meeting on Parleview via the committee's website. In light of these arrangements, the committee would ask that if you need to leave the room during the meeting, please do not walk in front of the sign language interpreters. Instead, please use the extremities of the room. In addition, we would ask that those in the room remain seated as much as possible during the meeting so that everyone in the audience can clearly see the sign language interpretation. Finally, if a member of the audience requires assistance at any time, please notify a member of the staff or the committee clerk. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And without further ado, I would like to welcome the Honourable Carla Qualtrough, Minister of Public Services and Procurement and Accessibility, as well as James Van Raalt, Director of General Accessibility Secretariat, and Eric Lapalme, Senior Policy Analyst, Accessibility Secretariat. Welcome to all of you, and Minister, I believe you have some remarks. Next 10 minutes are all yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your intentional and deliberate efforts and success at making these committee meetings inclusive and accessible for everyone. I know that the members of the disability community certainly appreciate it, as do I. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here today to present Bill C-81, the Accessible Canada Act, an act to ensure a barrier-free Canada. It was an honour to stand up in the House of Commons 2 weeks ago in open debate for this proposed act. The bill, should it be enacted, will allow for the identification, removal, and prevention of barriers that keep all Canadians from participating in society. Bill C-81 will significantly transform how Canada addresses accessibility. It will allow us to become proactive instead of reactive. It allows for a fundamental shift in the way the Government of Canada does business. We need to ensure equality for all from the start. It's time for broad organizational and cultural change. There is no reason to wait for people to be discriminated against before we act. We know discrimination exists. We know that over 50% of the complaints to the Canadian Human Rights Commission are on the basis of disability. Canadians with disabilities deserve better. Canadians with disabilities deserve to be valued as civic, social, and economic contributors to Canadian society with the full rights of citizenship. An incredible amount of dedicated work and public consultation went into the drafting of this bill. We heard from over 6,000 individuals and organizations from all across the country. Cette vaste consultation nous
This extensive consultation allowed us to better understand the needs of the disability community.
Is currently in place simply do not adequately take into account the barriers faced by Canadians with disabilities in their day-to-day lives. Canadians with disabilities do not want to be treated as a burden, but as fully equal members of society. They should have the same rights and the same opportunities as everyone else. And accessibility is about addressing the barriers created by society that prevent people with disabilities from enjoying their human rights on an equal basis with others. Le projet de loi C4
Bill C-81 will lead to the establishment of accessibility standards in the areas of employment, the built environment, information and communication technologies, the delivery of programs and services, and transportation. It will apply to Parliament, the Government of Canada, Crown corporations, and federally regulated entities, including organizations in the transportation, telecommunications, broadcasting, and banking sectors.
Canadians with disabilities, who are valued and contributing members of society, would have greater opportunities to participate in their communities and in the workplace. It will make it easier for them to get a job and stay in that job, to travel, to communicate with friends and family, and to access products, programs, and services on an equal basis with others. C81 will create a framework and new organizations for developing accessibility standards, establishing and enforcing accessibility requirements, and monitoring implementation. It would establish the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization, or CASDO, in order to create standards that will work for both industry and the disability community. The CASDO board will be comprised of a majority of members with lived disability experience. Once accessibility standards are developed, they'd need to be adopted into regulations by the Government of Canada to become law. Standards will change over time, with changes in technology and best practices. Having standards and regulations rather than in the proposed act will allow them to be updated more readily to reflect these changes. Our intention is to allow the government to move more quickly to improve accessibility by adopting recognized and established standards that have been developed and validated by technical experts, industry, and people with disabilities. And what will all this mean for Canadians with disabilities? An example I like to use is the accessibility of a bank ATM for a person with a visual impairment. Right now in our current system, if a customer is blind and can't use the ATM, and this isn't addressed by the bank, they'd need to file a discrimination complaint with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Once a decision was made, and this could be years later, in favor of the complainant, it would only be applicable to the specific ATM in question and not to all banks, and certainly not all ATMs across the board. To compare with what this scenario would look like under the proposed legislation, it would be CASDO, through a technical committee comprised of persons with disability, industry representatives, and technical experts, that would define the standards for accessible ATMs. The standard would then come to the Minister of Accessibility for adoption through the regulatory process, after which time the regulation would apply to all banks in Canada. The Accessibility Commissioner would monitor compliance with the regulation and would have the ability to impose monetary penalties if the banking sector was not adhering to the regulation. This example shows how this important change in framework and process shifts the burden from the individual to the system, and also allows for a more comprehensive and consistent application of accessibility within areas of federal jurisdiction. Ceci est un exemple tangible de l'effet positif.
This is a very tangible example of how this legislation will positively impact Canadians.
For organizations to think about how to integrate accessibility into their day-to-day operations. However, there may be circumstances, albeit exceptional, in which it would be appropriate for a regulated entity to be exempted from certain requirements under Bill C-81. For example, it may be appropriate to exempt, on a case-by-case basis, a small business because it might be more productive for this organization to focus their resources and efforts where they can have the biggest impact on accessibility. To ensure transparency and accountability, the exempting authority, so the designated minister, the CRTC, or the CTA, would be required to make exemptions public by publishing them in the Canada Gazette. The bill also provides real teeth to ensure meaningful and lasting change among organizations under federal jurisdiction. Compliance, enforcements, and complaints will be processed through the Accessibility Commissioner, with the exception of those under the jurisdiction of the CRTC, the CTA, and the Federal Public Service Labor Relations and Employment Board. This model builds on existing sector-based mandates for the purposes of efficiency and takes advantage of accessibility experience and expertise. Bill C-81 includes provisions for a no-wrong-door approach to ensure collaboration and coordination across organizations for efficient and expeditious referral of accessibility-related complaints. If passed, this legislation will also be a significant step in Canada's ongoing implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to which Canada is a proud state party. Once Bill C-81 receives royal assent, the Canadian Human Rights Commission will become responsible for monitoring the Government of Canada's implementation of the Convention. Now, make no mistake, there's still a lot to be done to create a Canada without barriers, and it's imperative to do things right from the get-go. As proposed, the legislation includes a number of foundational elements. It's anticipated that new organizations such as CASDO, the Accessibility Commissioner, and the Chief Accessibility Officer will be up and running within 6 to 12 months of the legislation coming into force, and anticipated that the first set of regulations under the legislation would come into force in 2020 to 2021. Now, how will Canadians know that organizations are taking steps to improve accessibility? Under Bill C-81, regulated entities would be required to prepare and publish accessibility plans in consultation. Thank you. She's just telling me to slow down. In consultation with persons with disabilities. These plans would describe the organization's strategies for improving accessibility and meeting their legal obligations. The organizations would also have to establish feedback processes on their accessibility from employees and members of the public, and prepare and publish annual progress reports on the implementation of their plans. Moreover, a new position called the Chief Accessibility Officer would be established. The person appointed to this role would be responsible for monitoring and reporting the overall outcomes achieved by the Act and in respect of systemic and emerging accessibility issues. Ces mesures permettraient.
These measures would allow for Canadians to monitor progress on accessibility in the implementation of C-81 in a very transparent manner. If enacted, Bill C-81 will bring broad organizational and cultural change. Through the creation and enactment of new accessibility standards, new planning and reporting requirements, and strong proactive enforcement tools, Bill C-81 will lead to greater accessibility for everyone in Canada, especially persons with disabilities.
Worthy of Canadians and Canada's place in the world. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I promise to speak slower.
Thank you. I apologize. We're trying to get a note past you through
I don't do well with the
Secretary.
visual clues. I apologize.
But we'll have to add that to my already long preamble because we do have the unique
in respect
scenario.
of the interpreters.
Yeah, we do have the unique
apologize.
scenario of the multiple types of interpretation that's going on here today. So I encourage all participants to just be clear and to keep a slower pace than maybe we're used to. Up first for questions, and first of all, the welcome, MP Nuttall. You're up first with 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for welcoming me here today. And certainly thank you to Minister Qualtrough for your presentation this morning. After I gave you the notes on consultation, we also sent a version to you digitally to ensure that I too was respectful of accessibility standards. Minister, throughout your presentation this morning, and I'm just going to quote a couple of items. It's time for broad organizational and cultural change. There's no reason to wait for people to be discriminated against before we act. And when I read that, I think about the 3 years that have gone by before this bill finally came to the floor. And I'm by no means blaming you, Minister. That is not the intent. But a lot of language we're seeing around the marketing of this bill is, we can't wait any longer, yet the government has waited 3 years, been through now onto its fourth minister, who was also its first minister. It's a little frustrating in terms of the stop and start that we've seen. I've heard that from consultations within the different communities. It also goes on to talk about the extensive consultation. And this consultation that's taken place, and I don't have the time to be able to read through it piece by piece, but essentially the first question I have is something that we've been able to speak about and your staff have been able to speak about with me as well. In terms of the consultation that's been taking place and people wanting immediate action, and I think the government saying that it wants immediate action, yet the language that's used in your presentation today and what's contained within the bill doesn't say there's going to be changes in accessibility standards. It says it will lead to. That's an exact word. It will lead to. And in fact, it says the first regulation changes would take place in 2021. And if we use the timeline and the success of the timeline's place in terms of 6 months after the government took place, it said it would have a bill related to accessibility, the Accessibility Act. That 2021 could be much further out. But I believe what the staff have said is somewhere within the 6-year time period from the point that this receives royal assent. So could you demonstrate to committee what changes, what actual practical change will go into effect besides the creation of new bureaus, of new departments? What practical changes affecting people with disabilities would go into effect day one?
Thank you, and thanks for the question. A couple things in immediate response around the consultation. Make no mistake, a lot of work has happened over the past 3 years. We're very proud of the intentional effort around our consultations to be included, to have a national conversation that I would submit has never happened before around disability issues, and we needed to take the time to properly consult and include anybody and everybody who wanted to speak on what their vision of an accessible Canada was. So I'm actually incredibly proud of the consultation process. I think it set a gold standard for how we can be inclusive in the way we consult as governments of any stripe. What we heard clearly through the consultation was that they wanted, Canadians with disabilities wanted to enshrine the concept of nothing without us and without us in law. What that means is we don't want to have standards or requirements imposed by law, by government, that'll impact our daily lives. What the Bill C-81 does is create a framework of a process, a system whereby Canadians with disabilities are squarely at the center and have direct input into the decisions that are being made around the barriers they're facing to accessibility.
Minister, I have two,
Yep.
2 minutes. So what practical change day one and the change in the system of the inclusion of those with disabilities, ensuring that there's firm consultation in the process that's gone through, I completely understand and I admire that part of the bill. But from what we've seen, there's no actual changes in terms of practical changes that will affect Canadians living with disabilities. And I have to go on to my next question. There's a portion in here with relation to fines for either government agencies or private sector some could be institutions, could be banks, could be many other things. And those fine dollars, where do they go when that fine is levied against that business or government agency?
About just over 1 minute.
Sorry, thank you, and I apologize for the preamble. Make no mistake, to answer your first question, I think that there will be absolute fundamental change in terms of how we interact and respect Canadians with disabilities day one after this law is enacted. In terms of the money for the fines, my understanding is it will just be going into general revenue.
Wouldn't it be better if those funds that were levied against organizations for not respecting persons with disabilities would actually go directly to something like the Opportunity Fund or something that would go back into encouraging better accessible standards with either private sector entities or within government entities?
I think that's a very innovative and interesting idea.
And are you open to amendments coming out of this committee and towards this bill at the end?
I definitely want to see this law being the best it possibly can. And I don't want to prejudge the outcomes or recommendations of the committee, but I'm certainly open to hearing what you all have to say and what stakeholders have to say.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. And up next, MP Long for 6 minutes.
Good morning, Minister, and thank you so much for coming this morning. And I just want to thank you for your incredible leadership and advocacy of those living with disabilities. My eyes were wide open to the challenges and barriers faced by people with disabilities on this HUMA committee several months back when we interviewed a couple gentlemen, and their names, it was Mark Wafer with Tim Hortons, and it was Randy Lewis with Walgreens. And we talked to them and learned from them and heard from them that their organizations' employee turnover dropped, absenteeism dropped, productivity increased, morale increased, And my own riding of St. John Ross, there's two organizations in the key industries run by Christine Evans, and then there's CCRW run by Joanne Mowry and Misty Denton. And, you know, they work with people with disabilities daily. They help integrate them into society. And again, you just see the wonderful opportunities that are there that C81 can certainly help with. Unemployment rates amongst people with disabilities are upwards of 80%. So the bill itself, C81, signifies the largest advancement for persons with disabilities since the Charter of Rights and Freedom. Can you tell the committee how this will fundamentally change the relationship between the federal government and persons with disabilities? And why is the bill necessary, in your opinion?
Thank you. I think what you're referring to at the beginning of your question is what I've come to think of as the untapped economic potential of the 14% of Canadians that have disabilities. And savvy, innovative, progressive, thoughtful, and clever businesses like the ones you mentioned have figured that out. We know that including Canadians with disabilities is a game changer in terms of the economic benefits. The Conference Board of Canada has estimated that if we remove barriers, accommodate Canadians with disabilities, you're looking at $1.3 to $1.9 billion annually of economic growth. That's significant. We know that there is improved loyalty, less absenteeism, all the benefits you talked about when we remove barriers, and that's the game-changing aspect of C81. It puts the onus on the government to remove barriers to inclusion upfront for Canadians with disabilities. And that is a fundamental shift in how we approach accessibility and disability rights in this country.
I've seen it time and time again in the riding that organizations seem to understand the potential, but to go from understanding the potential to actually enacting and hiring people with disabilities, there seems to be a gap there, a lack of preparedness, a lack of, I guess, maybe fear of the unknown. Can you just speak to that as to, you know, what we can do, what C81 will do to alleviate that?
Well, C81 is focused on removing barriers. The idea being if I can get into your building, I can shop there, I can work there, I can participate meaningfully in whatever is going on there. I can access services there. And the idea is that we are going to remove the obstacle to inclusion before discrimination happens. And that is a real key, kind of, as I've said, a shift to a proactive approach from a reactive approach.
Minister, you conducted extensive consultations across the country prior to drafting the legislation. Can you tell us what you heard from stakeholder and industry as to what they wanted to see in the bill?
Say that again, I apologize.
You conducted extensive consultations across the country prior to drafting the legislation. Can you tell us what you heard from stakeholder and industry as to what they wanted to see in C81?
Well, I sure could, and I could spend the rest of the hour telling you what we heard. But fundamentally, it came down to the shift in the conversation that we would like to see as Canadians with disabilities around away from the kind of the medical model of we need to take care of these poor people to a more social or human rights model of we are contributing valued citizens with rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and we have something to offer that should be valued. And that's a massive, massive change in the conversation. And just, I've been handed a note here. I apologize, Mr. Chair. I said 1.3 to 1.9 billion. What it is 1.3 to 1.9% of GDP a year for the economic inclusion, which is 26 to 38 billion a year. So I apologize. I think that's a big difference. So I wanted to make sure I said billion instead of percent. So I want to put that on the record.
So, Minister, you're comfortable that the stakeholders' feedback was integrated in drafting the legislation?
Well, I certainly am, and I can tell you the biggest compliment I've had since we tabled C81 was when a prominent member of the disability community looked me in the eye and said, I see myself in this. I see the feedback I gave in this, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. And now over to MP Hardcastle, please. And welcome to you as well to our committee today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to be able to advocate for a C81 that has some meaningful amendments to it, because I think we all celebrate the act. But to just use our time effectively, I just want to jump in with the minister, who has really been a champion. And I love the way, Minister, you just articulated that we wanted to see with this a profound change in how we look at, or how we take a medical or prescriptive approach rather than a social and inclusive approach. And that's the disability lens aspect of it that is so extremely important. And so what I'm seeing lacking that also came from the consultations is that we're not requiring federal laws or policies or regulations to be studied through a disability lens. I think maybe it's implied. I could make that argument on the other side that it's implied, but I would make the argument that it needs to be articulated. This is our historical achievement with this national act. And though it does not bring us far enough to comply with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, I will say that it falls short of that. We can make amendments and bring it in that direction. And I believe, Minister, some of your comments were about government being nimble and reassessing and looking at this in the future. So I'm hopeful for that, but I'd like to hear a little bit of what you think the potential might be now for us to actually anchor this a little bit more, this looking through a disability lens. And I noticed that your title, Minister, through you, Mr. Chair, is Public Services, Procurement and Accessibility. So can you imagine if we had a federal directive to look through a disability lens for procurement? I just feel like if we're going to do this, we have some real tangible ways that we really can anchor this just a little bit more. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts, your takeaways, and what you are thinking we can move forward, and what some of the potential opportunities are for us here with the committee to look at that.
Thank you, and thanks for your work on this file. It's wonderful to be working with you again. So one of the principles in the Act, and as you all know, the principles are kind of interpretive guidelines, or are how we are supposed to be looking at this law in the future, very clearly says that laws, programs, policies, and services and structures must take into account the abilities and needs of Canadians with disabilities. So to me, that means that every time we put in place a law, a policy, a program, a service, or a structure, we have to look at it through the lens of accessibility. I do think that in specific departments, and I'll use my own because I think procurement is an incredibly powerful tool to address accessibility. We are establishing a center or an office of accessible procurement, with the idea being that the Government of Canada will not procure products that aren't accessible. And we have set up, established, or the Prime Minister has appointed a Deputy Minister responsible for an accessible public service, whose job it is to prepare the Government of Canada to be an accessible employer and to offer accessibly services to Canadians. So there are machinery of government things going on right now, regardless, in parallel, with this law, legislation going through the House of Commons. But I would suggest absolutely that we cannot realize a barrier-free Canada unless the Government of Canada makes decisions taking into account the accessibility needs of Canadians with disabilities.
Thank you. So I guess further to that then, we have a situation right now in the absence of a national act that it's basically, I won't get into, we all know here, the provinces that have their own Disabilities Act, but we don't have a national framework right now. So having said that, these are, they're great and admirable tenets for us to have. But what's glaring in this is that it's not required So it's great that we're doing this and that we're going to lead by example, and that the minister is going to lead by example, and this new office will be trailblazing. But it isn't, these things are not mandatory for federal jurisdictions. What can we do to make the timelines more succinct, to bring some requirements in? Because I want to say as well, the feedback that I get from people living with disabilities is they're used to having to work with whoever's in government. This is the vulnerable population that can't afford to make enemies, and they don't. But they're tired of waiting, and we need some real teeth in this act, and we can't wait for them to get vocal about it, because people are worn out by having to advocate for themselves and their family members already. So it's up to us to beef this up and actually put some timelines in, actually put some requirements in. Right now, all of the wording is that you're allowed to do something. Nobody's required to do anything by a certain date. And I feel like we need to get our heads around that, and maybe where does the minister see some opportunities for us to maybe articulate to these federal jurisdictions to get ready that this is going to be coming more succinctly?
We're actually way over time, but I'm going to allow for a very quick answer, if that's okay.
Thank you, and excellent questions, and I could talk forever about this, so I'll keep it succinct, Mr. Chair. The point is that we need to establish in the standards the timelines you're talking about. So we need to set clear timelines. We also need to, and there are existing standards that are world-class within Canada and internationally that can be adopted immediately and then built upon. So the expectation, I would say, is right out of the gate, there will be standards we can adopt. We don't have to wait for years of consultations. In some areas, there are excellent website standards. There are, Ontario has done phenomenal work in their standard creation. We can adopt a similar standard at the federal level. I would suggest that there is some incredibly low-hanging fruit that we can adopt very, very quickly.
Thank you. Mr. Rumi, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister, for being here today, and thank you for your work on this file. It's been a long time coming, and taking into consideration all the consultation that needed to happen. I completely understand that. You had mentioned there's 14% of Canadians have disabilities. I would add to that, it touches most of us, if not all of us. And I remember when my brother, who's faced barriers all of his life, a private organization had offered him a job. It was a simple job, but he got a paycheck. And I remember how he felt. That's what we need to be offering Canadians today, is the opportunity for them to be able to move forward and for them to feel good about themselves. And that's why I'm so excited about this legislation. Minister, can you talk to us about why it's so important that Bill C-81 establish a framework for addressing issues facing persons with disabilities rather than incorporating standards directly into the legislation so they could be implemented immediately?
Thank you. The framework established through this legislation will allow for very technical standards to be developed. So you can imagine a scenario down the road where counter heights will be dictated through standard. And you can imagine putting that in law would be incredibly clunky, for lack of a better word. If we endeavored to put every standard into, first of all, we don't even know the hundreds of standards that will result over the years. We need to be able to, as accessibility and as our expectations change, and I'll use curb cuts as an example. Historically, the idea was you put a ramp down at the end of a sidewalk to go across the street, and that was the best way to accommodate someone with mobility aids. If we enshrine that in law, that wouldn't have been actually very helpful moving forward, because what we've learned in the north is when it snows and rains, puddles, happen at the edge of this curb, and instead they've raised the crosswalk so that it's just flat across. So the standard up there might be it's flat across instead of a curb down that results in a big puddle when it snows. And that's the kind of evolution that happens as our thinking changes and as our our expectations for inclusion evolve. And that's the kind of nimbleness, if that's a word, that CASDO and the standards will provide by having it not in law. Because can you imagine going to the floor of the House of Commons to change a section of an act because the curb cut thinking has evolved? And imagine that across every aspect of federal jurisdiction. It would be incredibly onerous.
Thank you. I actually agree with that. I think that disabilities have been changing. They've been evolving throughout the years. To put something in legislation that clearly might not impact everybody could be very onerous, and it could take a lot of time to get that changed. Can you explain a little bit more why there was a need to create a new government entity rather than using existing entities? I mean, a lot of people are asking these questions, such as the Canada General Standards Board, and how will the Canadian Accessibility Standard Development Organization, CASDO, be different from other government entities?
Thank you. Really important question. We looked around the world when we were designing this model, and what we saw is we needed to ensure that Canadians or citizens with lived disability experience were involved in the decision making and the creation of the standard. So incorporating it into an existing organization or structure risked watering down the impact of the disability voice in all of this. This is modeled after the United States, other countries that have gone down the same path but earlier, and we've learned from them that we needed to have lived experience fundamentally as part of the decision-making governance structure of this. And that's why we've put in this act that the board of CASDO has to be, more than 50% people with lived experience. You have to live it.
Thank you. I think before I came to Parliament, there was no glasses. I was able to read pretty good, and I'm finding now that I can't, that I need to have these glasses. I bring that up because for me, that's my own little experience with that, that it makes it even more difficult for people to be able to do their job, right? They certainly capable of doing their job, but we have to be able to allow for different disabilities that are out there. And I look forward to moving forward with this. And indeed, I think we owe it to every Canadian who has faced a barrier to make sure that we do get this right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And MP Morrissey, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Minister, a couple of points. There's no reference in here to the impact of an aging demographic in Canada on disability. Could you, does your department have data on that, and what the dynamic and demographic change is going to do, and how this legislation will impact positively on that?
Thank you. I think that's a reality that we are intimately aware of. We know that disability rates are estimated around 14. I would say a little bit higher, but let's go with 14% within 15 years, including Canadians who are elderly with mobility impairments. That's anticipated to go up quite significantly, over 20%. One of the reasons why we've moved away from the language of a Canadians with Disabilities Act to accessibility is to include the broadest range of people in this act, so that it isn't necessarily about your diagnosis or your condition or your illness or whatever is going on in your life. It's about removing the barrier that you are facing to being fully included, whatever that is, right? Whether you can't see, and if you're elderly and now you use a mobility aid, you too are going to be impacted by this law.
I want to go back to an earlier comment you had made regarding the economic impact on the Canadian economy. Was it $28 billion?
Yeah, thank you. I guess what the conference board has estimated is that by fully including Canadians with disabilities in the workplace, those who can work, and accommodating these individuals, there's an estimated 1.3 to 1.9% growth of GDP, which is $26 to $38 billion annually. It's very, very significant.
Could you give just a brief example, if you do, and if not, if you don't have it, it's fine. Because
the impact?
No, those are very significant numbers, startling.
Well, the idea...
Take me into a particular workplace, if you know of that, and just show us where.
Okay, I'll give you an example of, there's a group in British Columbia called the President's Group, which is a group of CEOs from major companies, YVR, Van City, Credit Union, who have completely recognized the economic potential that we're talking about today. Van City can show you and can tell you how hiring more inclusively has impacted their bottom line quite significantly, whether it's being able to address labor shortages through this untapped labor pool or creating a culture of diversity that results in more innovative solutions. Because let me tell you, Canadians with disabilities, some of the most innovative people you'll ever meet, because the world wasn't built for us, and we figure out very quickly how to innovate. There are, Tim Hortons was mentioned. YVR is an incredibly inclusive employer and service provider, and as such, Canadians and people with disabilities deliberately travel through Vancouver because their needs are going to be met. I didn't even talk about the accessible tourism market, which is a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar industry, because people need to go somewhere. And it's not just about the individual who doesn't have money to spend. It's about those of us who do.
Thank you, Minister. Obviously, your passion for improving the lives of people with disability is coming through in your answers. And that relates to my next question. Discussion around the need for timelines within the proposed legislation. Could you expand on why they were not included?
Yeah, that's been an ongoing...
What the logistical issues would be about attaching them to legislation?
So there's two aspects to the conversation around timeline. There's setting a date in this act by which accessibility will be achieved. And then there's also setting timelines in the standards, within the standards themselves. Some jurisdictions go for rolling timelines. So we'll establish the employment standard within 5 years, it'll then apply 2 years later. We'll establish a service standard within 6 years, it'll apply 4 years later, like whatever that is. But it is very difficult to predict how long it will take to establish a standard, and very, I would say, risky to suggest that we know exactly when accessibility will be achieved, given that the standards are always going to be changing. What is accessible today will not be accepted as a standard 5 years from now or 10 years from now. We know that. The curb cut example is a good example. We also want people to get moving on this now. We don't want to say we are going to have an accessible Canada by 2025 or 2030, and people sit back and say, okay, I've got time. We need to do this now. It's like giving people a reason to wait instead of requiring people to do something now. And I think that's really important. I also personally believe that, we would not put in the criminal code, Canada is going to be crime-free by a certain date. We wouldn't put in the Human Rights Act, Canada is going to be discrimination-free by a certain date. We need it now. Like, the Act has to say people deserve a barrier-free Canada today, and this is all the steps we need to take to get there. We know it isn't going to happen today, but to set a timeline at the other end just seems antithetical to what we are asking federally regulated entities to do.
About 10 seconds, so I'm going to take... Yeah.
What's the intention of your statement, progressive realization?
It speaks very clearly to the idea I was just talking about. It's enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. It's the notion that accessibility and barrier, accessibility changes as a concept. So what is acceptable today will not be acceptable in 10 years. The standards will change, and we will expect more of people as our thinking evolves.
Thank you. MP Barlow, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Minister, for being in front of the committee. There seems to be some misunderstanding or misconception about this bill, and that you're You're saying we don't want to set these standards, we don't want to put a timeline, we don't know when these things are going to be done, but we want to get going now. You know, and you talked about the criminal code, but yes, we don't want to say we're crime-free by 2030, but in the criminal code, there's certainly some regulations and standards and pathway on how to reach that goal, whether we can actually reach it or not. And you talked about that there are some standards. You know, I talked about, you know, visitable housing in Manitoba, the University of Alberta. All these things are doing some groundbreaking work on accessibility. There's some standards that you said are available right out of the gate. So why are some of those standards that are not that are leading edge, why are they not in this legislation at all?
Sorry, to clarify, you mean the technical details of the standards themselves in the legislation?
Correct.
For the same reason I articulated earlier, that we did not want to get into a situation where, do you mean in the body of the law or as a prepared regulation to be adopted immediately?
There's nothing in the bill in terms of a pathway or specifics on how you're going to achieve some of these, removing some of these barriers, making things more accessible. You know, you've talked about it through this entire presentation today, is that, yeah, we don't have anything ready. Why aren't some of these standards that are already set, as you said, there's some standards that we can enact from day one. So why are they not as part of this legislation?
Well, I would suggest that the law actually lays out a very clear pathway to how we're going to get there by setting up a standards organization, how that's going to be set up, what they're going to do to develop the standards, the priority areas of that we heard through the consultations are set up, and whether it's employment or service. This is not a complete list. Obviously, these are the 6 things we heard about the most in the consultation, but there will absolutely be opportunities. Remember, this is enabling legislation that sets up this framework and this system. And a lot of work has been done already that we can build upon / adopt, depending on the circumstance and the appropriateness of doing that. But I'm very confident that this law sets out a very clear path to how we're going to get there.
Thanks. None of this has been costed in the bill in terms of what the impact will be on private sector companies or private sector businesses that are federally regulated. Has there been a cost analysis on what the impact this will have on some of those private sector businesses that are federally regulated and what the impact will have on them? Has that been done as part of this consultation and analysis?
Well, we absolutely know the cost of not doing anything, and I would suggest that that you wouldn't be suggesting that there's a cost that's too high to be inclusive. But what we know through the regulatory process, as a matter of course, everything will be costed out. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the term, but there's an economic impact part of the process. James, can you help me out with it? Is it a RISA or is it a...
It's a RIAS. It's a
RIAS,
regulatory impact assessment statement.
Right. So every time one of these standards goes through the regulatory process, which I'll remind you is very public, and this is a chance for people to provide input on the standards, there will be a clear understanding of the cost of the implementation of that standard.
So none of that has been done as of yet. So I wanted to ask, you talk about having immediate impact, that this legislation is going to have an immediate impact on Canadians with disabilities. And I do give you credit. You talked in your speech in the House about the disability tax credit. Your words were a game changer for Canadians, and I appreciate that. But my colleague from Carleton put forward the opportunities for Workers' Disability Act, which would have ensured that Canadians with disabilities, the harder they work, the more they earn, they wouldn't be impacted by taxes and clawbacks. But you and your government voted against that bill. That bill would have had an immediate impact for Canadians with disabilities to ensure that what they were working and what they were earning was going back into their pockets. That would have had an immediate impact. So why not supporting a bill like that would have not taken 6 years to have the effect? It would have happened immediately. Why not support a legislation of that kind as well?
Well, like your colleague, and he and I have had great conversations about this, I absolutely believe that there are programs, particularly across the provinces and territories, that create disincentive to employment, because every dollar, or after a certain threshold, every dollar you make will be clawed back from the benefits. And literally some people cannot take the risk of losing their benefits by taking a job. And we need to correct that disincentivization, whatever the noun is. Quite frankly, while seemingly clever, the idea of using the finance and tax system to preclude or to incentivize provinces to change their programs and services around what benefits are available to Canadians with disabilities within their jurisdiction was beyond the reach of federal jurisdiction. This was a matter of federalism, and I had this long conversation with your colleague. But as a goal, I absolutely share it.
Thank you. I think I have one quick question left.
Brief, yep.
Yeah. The number you were citing today, the 1.3% to GDP, is Canada's more accessible, $20 to $30 billion a year. How did you come up with that number?
Sorry, that was work done by the Conference Board of Canada, and I think maybe, James, you could give more details about that at some point. Is that all right? Yeah.
We can share that with the committee.
Yeah. It was some really groundbreaking work.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And now over to Mr. Rumi, please.
My turn again. Thank you very much. There was mention from my colleagues on the other side about the provinces and the municipalities. Indeed, folks in my riding likely would have the same question. How does this impact them if it's only federal or provincial or municipal? So can you expand a little bit more within the federal jurisdiction, including the federal government and federally regulated industries? How do you envision this bill enabling you to work through the provincial and territorial and municipal governments, and how do you see this taking on a leadership role?
Thank you. I mean, we know that in some ways the federal jurisdiction is limited in terms of the businesses. Certainly, the vast majority of small and medium-sized enterprises are within provincial jurisdiction. What we know is that provinces are watching this process very carefully. We know, and I've heard directly from provinces, that they're waiting to see how we do this, and then they will head down similar paths themselves. In an ideal world, we would have incredible consistency across jurisdictions so that the experience of a Canadian with a disability is seamless. You know, if, the best example is credit unions and banks. Credit unions are provincial, banks are federal. But the day-to-day life experience of someone, they don't walk into a credit union and go, oh, I get this. It's Section 92 of the Constitution. There's going to be a different standard than the bank next door. That's not how we should operate as governments. I think this gives us incredible leadership opportunity to bring people to the table to ensure that consistency. I also know that CASDO, their standards they development can be model standards that could be quickly adopted through provinces. There's a number of opportunities here that enable us to, through our leadership, through CASDO, really impact provincial jurisdiction respectfully and respecting the Constitution.
Thank you. Can you talk about how this legislation fits in with our commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the new role of CRHC?
Yeah, it's a very exciting, I would say, win for the disability community. Certainly the international community has been calling for some time for Canada to establish a monitoring body for the UNCRPD. This law does that. This law sets the CHRC, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, as the monitoring body for Canada's implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. That is quite significant. The disability community would tell you that's a win, and I think internationally it'll be well received. In addition, the UNCRPD speaks everywhere through that document about removing barriers and obstacles to the full inclusion and participation, and that is fundamentally what this law does.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm going to share the remaining time with my colleague, Mr. Hogue.
MP Hogue.
Thank you. You made reference to a gold standard coming out of this and setting a gold standard. You also commented that the UN rights of individuals, that we fall short of those. Can you reconcile those two comments for me?
I mean, yeah, I think that I'm not sure I made the second comment, but I can certainly say that it's a work in progress. Our full and complete implementation of the UNCRPD. We've got a way to go in Canada. Quite frankly, this will go a way towards that, but it is a very high standard to be fully inclusive. I can't tell you a time when a certain point at which our country will be fully accessible and inclusive, but that's definitely a goal we should all share.
Well, one of the principles of policy development is often not just the engagement of the end users of the policy, which you've talked about, but also their involvement in the implementation of the policy. And we see around the world a number of instances where the policy development has worked extremely well and then has been lost in the implementation. Do you have a process in mind or in place which will allow those people who were consulted in the development of the process, who are end users in many instances, to also be involved in ensuring that the implementation is consistent with the expectations that were laid out when the policy was developed?
I think that's a fundamental misstep that legislators can make, and I don't think that's been done in this case. I think that there are two examples immediately come to mind. There may be others. First of all, the idea that on the board of CASDO, it's more than 50% of individuals with lived experience, and the technical committees of that body will also be comprised significantly of people with lived experience. The second piece is the requirement for federally regulated entities to create accessibility plans, and those plans must be done in conjunction and in consultation with citizens with disabilities. Progress reports have to be done in consultation with Canadians with disabilities. Like every step of this process, we have put in this law, as far as I can tell, a requirement for the ongoing participation of Canadians with disabilities.
Thank you. You made reference to a word called conky that I've not heard before. What does that mean?
Say that again?
I think you said conky near the beginning.
Conky? I apologize, I don't. Clunky. I think I said the system was clunky.
Clunky.
It's just clunky, it's not.
It's clunky, okay.
But
I understand
I
that
apologize if I
conky.
had said clunky. What I meant to say was clunky. The system is very clunky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have very little time left with the minister, so next on the list we have MP Nuttall. So I'm going to ask you, unfortunately won't have your full 5 minutes, maybe just a brief question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, there's been a report cited by the Conference Board of Canada about the economic benefits related to removing those barriers and to full accessibility. Within that report, because if they've been able to calculate the economic benefit, I'm sure they would have calculated what the costs are to get there. Could you describe what those costs are?
Yeah, sir, I don't believe they did that math. I apologize, but we can, as was says, we can definitely get that to you.
Because I think I have about 25 seconds
Yep.
left as a follow-up to that. When you said that there's things that we can do day one that are already live within provincial jurisdictions, I think is what was being referred to, surely those costs have been looked at and could be shared with this committee as it's going through its study.
So are you saying, for example, if we adopt the Ontario customer service standard, we can figure out exactly how much that will cost?
I'm saying that you said that there's things that we can do day one, and we will. So those items that you've said and cited that said you will enact those day one, if you know what they are, could you provide what they are? And if they've been done elsewhere, which is what you said had happened, could you provide what the costs associated with that are so that this committee, as they're going through the study, can use those to help determine some of its steps going forward?
I would suggest that I would recommend ones that are easy to adopt. I wouldn't preclude picking those, but I don't think I could tell you how much it will cost to update websites to a certain standard. But I can tell you the standard that of an accessible website, the globally recognized standard of an accessible website. I guess what I'm struggling a bit with is the implication that somehow there's a threshold beyond which this would cost too much. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's an acceptable premise. I apologize.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the participants here today, and of course thank you to the Minister for your time. We are going to suspend for a very, very brief moment to allow the Minister to get on with her day, and we're going to come back and continue questions with the government officials that are present. Thank you very much, and we're just going to suspend briefly. Just before we get started with questions, two things I just wanted to remind people. Can we please do our best not to walk in front of the interpreters? I don't mind if you walk behind me if you need to get to the other side of the room, but please don't walk in front of the interpreters. And also, just a request, please try to slow down. I'm fairly liberal with my timing. No pun intended. But I do. Those of you who have been in this committee for a while know that I'm not too much of a stickler on the time. If you want to slow down a little bit, going over 20, 30 seconds is not the end of the world. But let's try not to abuse that. But try to keep your pace to a slower pace for this meeting. So again, just to welcome and remind everybody, we have joining us James Van Raalte. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Raalte?
Van Raalte. Van
Raalte. Okay. Director General, Accessibility Secretariat, Benoit Gendron. Is that correct? Gendron. Director, Accessibility Secretariat, and Eric Lapalme, Senior Policy Assistant, Accessibility Secretariat. Thank you to all of you for being here. And we will begin our round of questioning with MP Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to split my time with my colleagues, Ms. Falk. But I just wanted to start and just to the minister's last comment there about, we're not saying that there should be a ceiling to the cost, but I think it is our fiduciary responsibility as legislators to understand that a budget should be set and costs should be understood. And I just found it ironic that as we talk about Canadians with disabilities, there's no ceiling to the cost. But our Prime Minister said there is a threshold of spending when it comes to veterans, and many of them are disabled and have issues. So if it's, there seems to be some disconnect there. And we're not saying by any means that there should be a ceiling, but we would, as legislators and representatives of our constituents and our taxpayers, on what the costs would be. My question to the officials is, there was just, and this is just a clarification for myself, but reading through the bill, on 73.1, it says the Accessibility Commissioner may, for the purpose related to verifying compliance or preventing non-compliance, enter any place, including a conveyance, in which he or she has reasonable grounds to believe there is a record, report, electronic data, or other document, or any information or thing relevant to that purpose. I'm just want to make sure I'm not reading too much into this, and the fact that a commissioner can enter a place of business for preventing non-compliance. Is that unusual, that you are predicting that a business is not going to comply with the new regulations and you're able to go in there? I'm just wondering if you could explain that section in the legislation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. The Accessibility Commissioner serves two roles. The first is proactive compliance or enforcement, and then the second part is dealing with complaints. And so from a proactive perspective, the Accessibility Commissioner has that power to go in and ensure that a regulated entity is caring about what's needed to live up to the regulation.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll pass it off to Ms. Falk.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today. One of the questions that I have is, I think most people, when they hear the word disability, they think of either visual, hearing, wheelchair, walker, that type of thing. And I know that the definition of disability in the Act goes into mental, intellectual, learning, communication, sensory impairments, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm wondering what the scope of this would be on buildings. So it could be argued that somebody with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, that type of thing, how are these buildings going to be impacted to be more accessible for them?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think this is an important question, and it's been a part of a learning process for all of us, and but I'm happy to provide an example for the committee. One of the biggest issues faced by a range of disabilities is, especially in the built environment, is a concept called wayfinding. And so it's intuitive for many of us when we enter a building on how to get from the entrance to, say, this chamber or this meeting room. We look for signs, we look for signals. For people with visual impairments, there should be Braille. But for many people with a range of functional limitations, it's not intuitive on how to get from A to B. And so it is expected going forward that the types of standards that CASDA would look at would incorporate this concept of wayfinding. And I would encourage the committee to engage with the disability community more about this important issue.
And would our constituency riding offices fall into this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The short answer is yes. The legislation, it will be applied to parliamentary entities, including constituency offices for members of parliament.
So I guess my next question is, in some of our rural and northern communities where this is very difficult, I know in my riding, I can't find anything in one of my communities that does need an office there. So has it been thought of what kind of impact this is going to have on the members themselves? I mean, some of the members have a difficult time finding something reasonably priced to serve constituents, and that is already, as accessible as it can be. So what if there is communities that have nothing available?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Where would that budget come from? Like, where would that money come from to
So thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. In terms of where that money would come from, I would defer that question to your relative boards of internal economy. But it speaks to the flexibility that's provided in the legislation for exemptions. We do need to recognize that in some communities, especially small communities or even small regulated entities, that best efforts can be made around accessibility, but there are going to be limitations. And so again, the legislation would provide for that type of an exemption made through the Speaker of the House of Commons.
Thank you. MP Sangha for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, it can be, any one of you can reply. There's no, it's open to you. What governance is in place to support whole of government implementation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think this is an important question going forward for the public service. It's a very horizontal piece of legislation, and that whole of government governance issue will be important in terms of both tracking progress of the implementation. I think at the first level, the Prime Minister has appointed a new Deputy Minister, Yasmin Laroche, who I believe will be appearing on Thursday morning, and you'll have an opportunity to hear from her, and she can provide her views on her role. But she is the Deputy Minister of Public Service Accountability and will be responsible for the development. Her job one is a Government of Canada strategy for making the Government of Canada a leader on accessibility. She has some initial support in that strategy. The government announced a number of initiatives to support her. The first is the hiring of 5,000 persons with disabilities within the public service over the next 5 years. Those are not incremental hires, but those are hires within the normal hiring process within the government. Number two is a centralized accommodation fund to support the hiring, the promotion, and the retention of persons with disabilities in any accommodations that they may require. And Public Service and Procurement Canada, as the Minister talked about, will be creating a centre of excellence for procurement, as well as undertaking accessibility audits of government buildings. The second part is that each deputy head within the Government of Canada, and so that's over 133 organizations, crown corporations, agencies, traditional departments like my own, Employment and Social Development Canada, will be required to submit accessibility plans. And so there will be an opportunity to monitor the progress that each department is making, both on an individual basis and across the Government of Canada. We will have line of sight on that progress or lack of progress, and that, again, those accessibility plans must be made in consultations with persons with disabilities. And finally, the legislation sets out a new office, the Chief Accessibility Officer. And the role of that office is to have that broad line of sight on how the system is working or it is not working. They have to report annually to the Minister on how well we are doing. And as well, that office can conduct special reports, either a question from the from the Minister, or it has own motion powers to do that on its own.
Okay. We need these standards, which we are talking about, accessibility standards. They are to identify what are the requirements, then remove those things, and then you have to prevent the barriers for the accessibility. You have to, as you have talked about this now. So what are the actually principles you are going to set for those to identify, remove, and to implement those things?
So the legislation empowers the new Canadian, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer that question. The legislation empowers the new Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization to help set those priorities. It will be a departmental corporation. It will set those priorities both in consultation with the minister, but as well as persons with disabilities. And as the minister has explained, the board of CASDO will be represented by a majority of lived experience. Some of the areas, the priorities that are set out in the legislation will help, of course, guide CASDO's deliberations on those priorities, but we are looking at 6 priority areas, namely employment, transportation, information and communication technology, service delivery, procurement, and I always forget one, the built environment, very important. Yes.
Yeah. And how you say that for the accountability and for the this transparency, which department will be looking into and how it will be implemented?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I understand the question from the member.
Okay. We are looking for the transparency and the accountability into the system, total system. So who will be actual responsible for this to look into, to see that accountability and this transparency is in place?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important in 2 places in the legislation from an accountability and transparency perspective. The publication of the accessibility plans and the feedback mechanisms and the progress reports are made public. Those publications are not to the Government of Canada. We will be tracking them, we will be monitoring them, we will be assessing them. We certainly will be providing advice on how they could be improved. But the purpose from an accountability and transparency perspective in terms of having those reports published is so that Canadians, and in particular Canadians with disabilities, have ready access to them, and they can hold those companies or organizations to account from a citizen or a customer perspective. And that's a very important principle in terms of both persons with disabilities will be involved in the development of the plans, but they will also have access to them so that they can have an opinion on how well progress is being made or not being made. Within the system, within the Government of Canada system, the legislation provides for the Chief Accessibility Officer, and that the role of that individual and the office that will be supporting them is to provide an annual report through the minister to Parliament on how the system is working or it's not working. And that includes that regular annual report, and as well that individual, that officer will have the power to conduct and submit special reports. Either an individual or a group of people have identified an issue for the Chief Accessibility Officer, and they think something should be studied, and the Chief Accessibility Officer can then report to the minister, or maybe the minister has an issue that they want addressed.
Thank you very much, sir. MP Hardcastle, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't realize on this committee the way the format is that my time is so limited, so I'm going to be extremely blunt so that we can get to, so that we can get through because it is intriguing. But let's talk about exemptions right now. A moment ago, you alluded to what might be a logical exemption in the remote north or something with a small community scenario, but the way that I'm reading the exemptions, it's very different. So Cabinet has the power to exempt. The CRTC and the CTA, this is a more powerful scenario. I just would like to understand a little bit more about why we are allowing those kind of exemptions with major jurisdictions, and that Cabinet is allowed to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I think it's an important question. There are two types of exemptions that are contemplated within the legislation. The first is a statutory exemption, and that's around the reporting requirements that I just referenced a moment ago around the accessibility plans and the feedback mechanisms. Those exemptions are provided in the exact case that I responded to in the question for the other honourable member, in terms of it's a recognition that there is a potential, especially for small organizations, small entities, let's say a small interprovincial trucking firm. It has 5 employees. It's a well-run business. It's trying its best to make that business both accessible to any employees that have a disability or customers that may have a disability. And the exemption there is a recognition that the government, whatever the regulatory body is that has jurisdiction for that regulated entity, it may be better that company focus on accessibility for employees or customers rather than doing an annual report. And we want that flexibility so that those discussions can happen about making progress. What's the right balance with limited resources, so that they can have that exemption. Then there are regulatory exemptions, and those again are to recognize that under the regulations there may be reasons why we need a tailored approach to a size of a company or a size of an entity. And as well, there's an exemption, what we call an innovation exemption. So there will be cases where both within government and within the federally regulated private sector, a company is out ahead of the regulatory process. They have found an innovative solution for meeting accessibility requirements, and we don't want new rules coming in behind them penalizing them. We want to recognize the work that they've done in terms of supporting accessibility. If they've done it in a way that is equal or greater than the regulatory requirements, we want to be able to exempt them from the regulatory rules.
And in terms of enforcement, besides the idea that the disability community is going to look on a website and engage in making businesses enforce an accessibility plan, what about enforcement from the accessibility commissioner? What about those powers? Right now, we see that it's fragmented among different entities, and that like I said, the CRTC and the CTA implementation and enforcement are splintered. How do you think there's an opportunity for us to consolidate this better so that it's not just dependent on this idea that it will be citizen engagement that does the enforcement? Right now, an accessibility plan, there's nothing, you have to post it, but when you read the language, it doesn't have to be implemented. You've got to have a plan and you have to make it public, but you don't have to implement it. So I'm wondering if you see there's opportunities for us to concentrate on consolidating enforcement in one place where we could be doing that. Because right now there's like 4 different places that you do implementation and enforcement. And for a disability community, that's really impractical.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. Lapalme, to address the question.
Thank you. So in terms of enforcement, so yes, there is that public accountability for the plans and progress reports, and there is that requirement to prepare and publish those progress reports, and part of those reports is the entity is talking about how it is implementing its plan. In terms of enforcement, so there is the public aspect, but also the Accessibility Commissioner for the entities that are within its jurisdiction, and the Canadian Transportation Agency and the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission for the organizations that are within their jurisdiction. They'd have to be notified of the publication of those plans and reports, and as well as the fact that the organization has implemented its requirement to establish a feedback process. And in fact, they can enforce on those requirements. So it is within their power within their enforcement powers, to ensure that the organizations that have those requirements have published their plans, have consulted with persons with disabilities, have made them available to persons with disabilities in alternate formats, for example. And as Mr. Van Rolte mentioned, there is also that possibility to work with entities to ensure that their plans and reports are meeting requirements and that they could be made better, made stronger. So there is, and then of course, more broadly in terms of meeting their requirements under regulations, in standards that have been adopted into regulations, that's where also the Accessibility Commissioner, the Canadian Transportation Agency, and the CRTC have their broad enforcement powers to ensure organizations are in fact meeting their requirements.
Thank you very much. And now over to MP Long, please, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming in this morning. I don't think there's any question that C81 is going to open up opportunities and break down barriers for people with disabilities. So I do have a few questions for you this morning. How does this legislation compare to accessibility legislation from other jurisdictions, provincially and international?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to respond to this question because I think it speaks to quite a bit of work, both that the public service has undertaken, but also in consultation with the disability community across the country and internationally. I think it's important to stress that and give credit where credit is due in terms of some of the provincial leadership that has been undertaken over the past decade, and namely Ontario, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia, and allowed us to build on that foundation. There's quite a bit of similarity between C81 and what it sets out to do, and the legislative frameworks within those three jurisdictions that I mentioned. In four areas in particular. First is standards development, so the development and enforcement of standards, the concept of the accessibility plans, issues related to compliance, and then review mechanisms, again, at the end to make sure that the legislation is meeting its needs. And so I am referencing the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 2005, the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, which was passed in 2013, and most recently, the Accessibility Act in Nova Scotia in 2017. And so from a standards development perspective, the provinces, it varies somewhat amongst how they work, but provincial accessibility laws generally provide for the creation of standards through standard development committees and or an accessibility advisory board that may create committees to develop standards. By contrast, C81 proposes CASDO in terms of having that arm's length independent standard setting process and the technical committee piece, and happy to answer questions about CASDO and its ability to set model standards. From an accessibility plan perspective, again, similar to provincial laws, C81 sets out that planning and reporting requirement. And one of the big differences, however, is including persons with disabilities in that process in terms of, as well, having a feedback mechanism. Provincial accessibility laws and Bill C81 all include provisions to ensure compliance, including provisions for inspections, compliance orders, and administrative monetary penalties. In the province, or in the provinces, these are undertaken by designated directors and inspectors. These individuals are housed within government departments responsible for administering the Act, while as under Bill C81 establishes unique remedies in relation to the contravention of accessibility requirements that result in harm. And finally, in terms of that review process, similar to provincial accessibility acts, Bill C81 provides for periodic reviews of the provision and operation of the Act.
Just want to jump in. You've mentioned provincial jurisdiction, but what about international? Do you have any?
The closest, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The closest model is within the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they Of course, the federated model within the United States and the powers of the federal government vis-a-vis the states is very different than we have in Canada. But in terms of looking at setting up the CASDA, we did look at the American Access Board. And in fact, Minister Qualtrough traveled to Washington, D.C. Last 2 springs ago, almost 2 years ago, and spoke with representatives from that organization in terms of feeding into and informing the legislation. Beyond that, the models, we looked at the UK, we looked at Australia, we looked at New Zealand, and this legislation goes far beyond what those jurisdictions are doing.
Okay, I just want to circle or hone in a bit on enforceability. So we've heard concerns about the enforceability of the standards and regulations created under the framework established by the bill. Can you just speak more to enforceability mechanisms? How are you going to enforce this?
Thanks. Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm going to turn that answer over to my colleague, Mr. Lapalme.
Thank you for the question. So, as I mentioned, so there are the 3 main enforcement bodies under the Act, and that is the Accessibility Commissioner, the Canadian Transportation Agency, and the CRTC. And but in terms of the proposed Accessible Canada Act itself, the main body set out there is the Accessibility Commissioner. The Canadian Transportation Agency has broadened mandate and increased powers and responsibilities through amendments that are proposed to the Canada Transportation Act. The Commissioner, the Accessibility Commissioner, would have a broad range of powers. So these are set out, in terms of inspections, production orders, so could kind of like a paper-based audit, could request documents. Compliance orders, so those are orders to stop an activity, and then there are notices of violation. These can be a warning, so something's not good and you're getting a warning, but it should be fixed. It can also be a notice of violation that has an administrative monetary penalty associated with it. And
sorry, I got to cut you off. Maybe MP Hogue might give you a few minutes to follow up, but I have to go to Gordon. You're up next, sir.
You can finish. You're welcome.
So briefly then, so these mechanisms, these are part of what are called kind of the proactive compliance enforcement. So this is the Accessibility Commissioner proactively going out and ensuring, verifying compliance with regulatory requirements. And then there's also a remedies process available to individuals. So individuals that have experienced harm as the result of the contravention of regulated standards would be able to file a complaint with the Accessibility Commissioner. And then there, the Commissioner would potentially, launch an investigation, and if the complaint is substantiated, then the Commissioner has a wide variety of remedies available that he or she could order. So that includes compensation for pain and suffering, amounts for lost wages, additional amounts if a practice was the result of a willful or reckless practice. And there are maximum amounts set out in legislation for pain and suffering compensation and for willful and reckless practice, but there are also provisions to ensure that these amounts change over time to account for inflation. So there is this proactive side and there is the reactive side to help remedy individual situations of harm.
Looking at the preamble and the purpose with respect to legislation, there are, I think, values that and principles that we would all, in a free and positive and progressive democratic society, support. And I look particularly at the reference where it's made to the state, Canada being a state party to the United Nations Convention, has agreed to take appropriate measures respecting accessibility and to develop and monitor minimum accessibility standards. A little further on, it's referred more effectively, I think, to the vision or the mission statement, which says Parliament considered that it is essential to ensure the economic, social, and civic participation of all Canadians, regardless of their abilities or disabilities, and to allow them to fully exercise their rights and responsibilities in a barrier-free Canada, talking about right across Canada. Yet when we look at this the bill will only affect organizations within federal jurisdiction, including federal government and federally regulated industries. So how do you envision taking this as a federal government? How do we envision taking this set of principles and values and being able to ensure that we can, whether inculcate is the word, whether we can make that a principle, a vision, a statement that is going to be taken on by provinces, by local governments, by societies, all of those things which are not contained within the regulatory provisions of this legislation. So if we're wanting to really change the intent, we're wanting to really change our country in a positive way around this with all of the things that are laid out here, how are we, what type of levers do we have? We often talk about the federal government wanting to use different methods to encourage or incentivize provinces and local governments to be more actively engaged. What do you see as what do you see as the disconnect? How do we deal with that disconnect between that great set of values and principles and the application of those?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm happy to answer this. It's a very fundamental question about, and the Minister speaks of this frequently, about culture change. And I think there are three levers, if I can use those words. One of them is quite formal, and the two are more on the informal side. So on the formal side, Bill C-81 again contemplates the creation of CASDO. The independence of CASDO is very important in terms of its ability to establish model standards for which any organization can use a model standard. And so from an ideal perspective, the minister can ask CASDO to establish standards, but other organizations can work with CASDO to establish model standards as well. So a province or a municipality or an international organization can approach CASDO and can ask them, would you be able to develop a model standard on, let's pick open spaces. Open spaces are not the built environment, it would be like parks and recreational areas. And we want a model standard, and we want you to form a technical committee. Could you do that for us? And CASDO has that ability under the proposed legislation to do that. Model standards, once they're developed, are, again, as I said, have the ability to be used by any organization. And having that independence and that model standard means that, again, any jurisdiction, province, territory, municipality can use that model standard to have that coherent approach across Canada. On the informal side, there is the regular ongoing conversation at a political and officials level with our provincial and territorial counterparts. So for the past 2 years, as an example, I've been co-chair with my Ontario and Saskatchewan colleagues of an open forum on accessibility, which is to set the groundwork for a more formal consultation with the provinces and territories, should C-81 be adopted, in how are we going to work together in terms of that, again, accessibility coherence across jurisdictions. There is the leadership, as I indicated, from Ontario and Nova Scotia and Manitoba. Also active at the table, I would say, is Newfoundland and Labrador and British Columbia. Lots of interest in what we're doing and how we're going to work together. And I know the minister has had a number of occasions to talk to her provincial and territorial counterparts going forward. The final informal piece is that behavior change. It's that conversation about how are you going to do better, how are you going to take it to the next level. The legislation is just one part of that conversation change. Again, it's a lever to ensure that organizations are talking about accessibility. But I think the minister, especially in her business case for why does it make sense, of course, to hire persons with disabilities, is also a big important part of that conversation.
Thank you. Now for 6 minutes, MP Dion.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to go back. We know that this bill will apply to federal government, federally regulated agencies. And we've also heard that implementing it, correct me if I'm wrong, but implementing it could result in up to a $38 billion per year benefit. I'm just trying to understand that a bit more. I mean, it just seems so huge for something that is not going to apply everywhere. Can you break it down a bit more? It's just staggering.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to offer a clarification. So what the minister is talking about is a study that references employment for persons with disabilities and their inclusion in the labor market. And so the economic benefit to the Canadian economy is estimated at between 1.3 and 1.9% of GDP. So all of those individuals who are able to work and contribute, who are now unemployed, if they were working, that's the calculation for that economic benefit. The legislation will contribute to the employment of persons with disabilities through the development of employment standards around accessible workplaces. So part of the equation in getting persons with disabilities both in and staying within the labor market is ensuring that hiring organizations have policies from a recruitment, a retention, and promotion perspective that are accessible and inclusive for persons with disabilities. But it is not a one-for-one calculation. There are many other things that the government is doing in terms of supporting the employment with persons with disabilities, as well as our partners within the provinces and territories and the nonprofit community.
Thanks for that. Now, it seems to me that we're creating a lot of bureaucracy here. You'll have the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization. You'll have an accessibility commissioner. You'll have a chief accessibility officer. And also, there's talk of hiring 5,000 civil servants. What would they be doing? What would these civil servants be doing? It sounds like they're just going to be regulating and.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an important question. I'm going to divide it in two parts. So, as I said earlier in an earlier response, the announcement about hiring 5,000 new persons with disabilities into the public service is part of the normal hiring practice as attrition occurs and hiring occurs across the Government of Canada. Right now, the participation rate across the Government of Canada for persons with disabilities is around, I think, between 4 and 5%. 5.6. Thank you, 5.6%, which when you match that against the fact that 14% of the Canadian population is a person with a disability, while we are meeting our employment equity targets, it still falls quite short of representativeness across the country. The 5,000 additional hires over the next 5 years will bump that 5.6% up to somewhere around between 7 and 8%. So again, there's a lot more that could be done in terms of recruitment within the public service to make the public servants representative of persons with disabilities. And again, Deputy Minister LaRoche, I'm sure, will have a lot to say about that on Tuesday. It's something near and dear to her heart. In terms of the new organizations that are contemplated under Bill C-81, just at a high level, recognizing the time, Mr. Chair, I think I've explained. So the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization will have a mandate for developing standards on an ongoing basis for the government to consider from a regulatory perspective. It will also have a technical assistance mandate in terms of being able to help organizations translate what does a model standard actually mean for an organization. And it also actually has a research mandate in terms of contemplating and getting ahead of what are the standards needed for the next generation, so that we're not in a reactive mode in standard building or standard development, that we're actually looking and leading on what the next range of standards are going to be needed. The Chief Accessibility Officer, as I believe I've explained, has that systemic monitoring role. The person will be required to report annually on the progress in implementing the legislation across the system. And again, it will have that special reporting capacity should either the minister or somebody from the outside signal that there are problems with the system. And then finally, the Accessibility Commissioner, which will be housed within the Canadian Human Rights Commission and is intended to take advantage of the infrastructure that already exists in place within that commission. We'll have the proactive compliance and enforcement, as well as the complaints handling mandate that my colleague has explained for the committee.
Again, this is all very commendable. We all want to make Canada more accessible, but do you think it's fair to the Canadian taxpayer that you're essentially saying we should just sign a blank check, especially when you consider that some of the people who would be lower income would be accessible, have accessibility issues themselves, and probably earn less money, and it's their taxes. They're going to be impacted by this, but we have no idea what this is going to cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very briefly, please.
Just very briefly, the regulatory impact assessment statements that are required for each regulation package are required under law, under the Cabinet Directive on Regulations, to include a cost-benefit analysis for each set of regulations.
Thank you. MP Morrissey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to the 5,000 positions within the public service, which I understand those are existing positions that will be designated to be filled by a person with a disability. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you are correct.
Which leads to my second question. Not only do people with disabilities face greater challenges in the rural parts of the country, but employment opportunities are limited as well. How has that been analyzed within the department when you made the decision to identify 5,000 positions, which would take your ratio from, I believe you said 5 to 7%, which is still small considering the population is 14% of people with disabilities. How would you address the issue of people with barriers?
So within
small rural communities with limited federal positions there to begin with.
So I think that, Mr. Chair, is a very important question, and it speaks to the range of programming that's offered by the Government of Canada. In terms of the new workforce development agreements that have been negotiated with provinces and territories, in terms of being able to meet the employment needs of persons with disabilities, as well as the Opportunities Fund, which is, again, another $40 million a year to work with the not-for-profit sector in terms of identifying priorities for the supports that a person might require, both to get them even into an interview and get them ready for an interview, and then in the supports that they may require in terms of that first job or the transition to another job, and that funding, both the funding that is provided to the provinces and territories and the Opportunities Fund, is funding that's provided across Canada.
Do you have any data on what the picture is today, where positions are located?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to get that data for the committee, and those responsibilities are elsewhere within my department, but we can certainly supply that for the committee.
I would like to see a breakdown of where existing positions are located that are being filled by people with disabilities. And I do applaud the Minister for setting an initial target of an additional. Is this an additional 5,000? Did I get that correct?
It's not incremental to public service hiring. It is within public service hiring. It's an additional 5,000. Yes, within over the next 5 years.
Public service.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. And still, though, that number will only go from 5% to 7% on it. I want to go back again to, you had spoke briefly, I believe, to my colleague, Ms. Falk, on exemptions and limitations. Again, and I want to take it in a rural context again to small identity, small business, and you did speak to it briefly in a good way. Could you elaborate a bit more on how the legislation would work in those communities? Would business in those communities, would it be similar to urban center, which would have a large
it's
footprint?
the same process for any regulated entity that would be seeking an exemption. There would be an application made to the responsible minister or regulatory body. So depending on the jurisdiction, it could be the minister responsible for accessibility, it could be the Minister of Transport who is responsible for the Canadian Transportation Agency, or it could be the CRTC. There would be then public service advice provided to the minister responsible on whether that exemption and the basis for that exemption was founded. And then a determination by the responsible minister or the responsible body, and then that exemption must be published for transparency purposes in the Canadian Gazette.
Do you know what the timeline would be around that? Have you determined that?
Mr. Chair, I have to say no.
Okay. We're good? You have more? Yep. Go ahead.
That's one question. And you're referencing a lot of departments, and different departments would have to respond, and different agencies. So my question is there a governance model? And if there is a governance model in place that supports this whole of government implementation, because obviously it requires a whole of government implementation process. And I'm not sure if that was addressed. You may have, but I'm not sure if it was.
Briefly, please.
Yeah, very briefly, Mr. Chair, because it was addressed. So at 3 levels, there is the new deputy responsible for public service accessibility. And again, she'll be happy to present to the committee on Tuesday. Each deputy minister is required to submit an accessibility plan. And so there's lots of governance amongst and between deputy ministers and departments.
That new deputy minister's primary responsibility is to oversee the whole of government.
She will be responsible for developing a Government of Canada strategy to allow the Government of Canada to become a leader on accessibility.
Thank you. MP Falk, please.
Thanks, Chair. I know I've heard a lot this morning about culture change. And so in my previous experience in my line of work, I had the opportunity to work with people that had an array of disabilities. And I'm just wondering if there really is the belief that creating a whole new bureaucracy, more departments, more red tape, if that's actually going to shift the culture. I know working with people, I mean, it was the worst when we would have to call this person and that person and that person just to get them a ride somewhere, or working with social services or that type of thing. So I'm just really wondering if creating this whole new department is going to shift the culture like it seems to believe happen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think there's a couple of policy responses to that question. First is we do know that by directly involving persons with disabilities in the decisions that affect them will affect that culture change. And so having them involved in an organization where they are informing the development of accessibility plans and informing how that organization thinks about persons with disabilities, both employees with disabilities and customers or citizens with disabilities, that will change the conversation about how that organization approaches that customer base or those employees. I do, from a policy perspective, again, having persons with disabilities involved in governing the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization and being involved in technical committees for standards development, again, will change the conversation about those issues that affect persons with disabilities' lives. Do I think Do I think the legislation is the only silver bullet for changing the conversation? That's not what I'm saying. There's lots of other things that can and should be done in terms of that culture change.
I guess really what my question is I don't think a top-down approach works well. Like, I think if we're really going to shift culture, it's everyday people at the grassroots level that we have to impact. And so I guess that's just my question. I just don't see how effective, tangible, real change is going to happen today by doing all these consultations and all these reports that is projected for years down the road. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That actually frees up some time. MP Hardcastle.
Thank you. I guess I want to go back to the issue of exemptions because I'm still trying to understand. So it's the minister that has to deem the exemption, and we already have a track record for the CRTC and the CTA. To be frank. That's where my concern is. What is the recourse? What is the appeal process? How do we, right now, there's no publishing of the decisions and the rationale for it. There's nothing articulated in the bill right now. So that's my concern. I'm not saying that it's that all of these decisions would be arbitrary, but do you see where I'm going? And maybe there's an opportunity where we need to have an amendment, unless I'm understanding it wrong. So when a decision is made for an exemption, and I'm in the person living with disability community that we just heard here today is supposed to sharpen our swords and advocate whenever we need to on the ground. How do I do that? If I don't understand the rationale and there's no mechanism right now for me to appeal that decision. Does that seem like maybe I'm missing a beat and misunderstanding it, or do you see an opportunity for us to maybe re-examine that?
Thank you, Minister Chair. From a transparency perspective, the decisions around an exemption do have to be published in the Canada Gazette, and so there is an accountability mechanism there in terms of making the public aware of a decision by either a minister or the regulatory body. And from an appeal perspective, a minister can always change their mind. More importantly, from a flexibility perspective, a minister can put conditions on the exemption. The exemption can be time limited. The exemption can be a partial exemption. So it's not a. I don't want to leave the committee with the impression that it's a carte blanche, but the appeal mechanism would be to the decision-making body itself.
So the rationale, through you, Mr. Chair, again. So the rationale for the decision doesn't have to be published, though. And
that is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and there isn't a direct appeal process. The Accessibility Commissioner, if you don't, that's okay if it's just an area we need to explore. I get that. That I don't know if that would be under the commissioner, the office of the commissioner, or the. Anyway, yeah.
I will clarify that exemptions under the Act are undertaken in consultation with the Accessibility Commissioner.
Excellent. Thank you. That takes us to the end of our second round. Sorry, Madam Hardcastle.
Mr. Chair, if I could just maybe we can have that information circulated to the members of the committee, just to clarify. Right now, as we go in contemplating amendments, right now, is there an appeal process for a member of the community to appeal a decision? I think that would be important for us to have that information. Thanks.
Again, thank you to everybody present today and watching at home. I wanted to personally thank those involved in working on the logistics and setup that we have here today. This is unique, and I just think it's important to recognize their efforts and the efforts moving forward in this study. Just for some housekeeping, future business, we have on October 4th, we are back here in this space. Again, we're going to be working on C81, our first session with witnesses. And then after the break, we're back here again in this space on October 16th to meet with the minister and witnesses on motion M110. And again, thank you to the department officials for being here with us today. Adjourned.